Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear CyCon participants.
Welcome to the 13th International Conference on Cyber Conflict with the theme Going Viral. My name is Liina Lumiste.
And I'm Henrik Beckvart, and we will be your hosts for this conference. On behalf of the organizing team of the NATO CCDCOE, we are excited to have you with us online for what should be an interesting couple of days.
Since 2009, CyCon conference has been a gathering place for cyber-minded people from governments, military, industry, academia, and the private sector, growing both by size and importance over years. Last year, due to COVID-19, CyCon was replaced by a virtual book launch of the CyCon proceedings, but now we are back and happy to welcome around 70 speakers from 25 countries and participants from 55 countries participating in 21 sessions.
And of course, we'd also like to thank you, our registered participants from around the globe, for being with us. But without further ado, we're very pleased to welcome on the stage the director of the NATO CCDCOE, Col Jaak Tarient, who will deliver his opening remarks for this year's CyCon. Jaak, please, the floor is yours.
Madam President, Excellencies, Generals, Admirals, dear faithful fans of CyCon, it is an honor and a privilege to welcome you to the 13th annual CyCon conference and the first CyCon held in online format. We have a very nice studio set up here in Tallinn, and we are excited and ready to go. But I want to assure you that we miss you. We want you to be here with us. Online conferences are different, and we have adjusted to it. In the old days, once we had you lured here to the northern corner of Europe, we had you boxed in, and we knew we could pump 8 or more hours of latest cyber research and high policy trends into you. We know that today we are competing for your attention against lots of other content coming from the parallel windows of the same screen that we are on. I am painfully aware that the moment I say a boring sentence, I have lost you to your 5th grader math homework problem. Thus, our online CyCon's days are shorter and more condensed. As always, we do not feature cybertainers on our virtual stage. People who present in the CyCon panels have written scholarly research papers that have been heavily scrutinized by our selection board. The esteemed keynote speakers have proven their value with actions and successes in their professional careers in various fields of government, military, academia, and industry. As always, it is nearly impossible for me to choose some things from the agenda without being completely unfair to those that I failed to mention. But life is hardly ever fair, and I'm still going to make my subjective highlights. We had a very busy workshop day yesterday, and I felt that the topics were more practical and actionable than ever before. We were talking about autonomy and automation in cyber defense, about building resilience through the use of cyber ranges and exercise, about developing NATO cyber exercises to be even more realistic and relevant. As for today's opening day, the fireworks of keynote speakers is a tradition, and shortly I will have the honor to introduce them. Tomorrow, after an intense day of keynotes and exciting panels, stay tuned into the very end as Keir Giles will interview Dmitry Alperovich in a fireside chat. Dmitry is a member of our center's advisory board. You might most likely know him as a founder of CrowdStrike. Currently, Dmitry has devoted his efforts to advancing American prosperity and global leadership in 21st century and beyond through the recently launched nonprofit Silverado Policy Accelerator. On Friday, we open and close with expert keynotes. Dr. Karine Banelier-Christakis from the University of Grenoble is a globally recognized expert in international law. And as a home of Tallinn Manual, we're thrilled to have her on a virtual stage of our CyCon conference. Graham Cluley is a technology trends blogger and one of the leading cybersecurity influencers with 100,000 global followers. Welcome to CyCon. As already noted, the online CyCon is naturally different in many aspects from the CyCon that you and us are used to. There is noticeably one item missing from the agenda. There is no Women in Cyber breakfast this year. Obviously, there aren't any breakfasts in an online format, but there is more to it. I felt at the last CyCon in 2019 that the breakfast format is outdated, that it is time to bring this event to the prime light of the main stage, and I intended to have a Women in Cyber panel. And I failed miserably. In Air Force language, I crashed and burned. But I learned a very valuable lesson that I would like to share. In my best intentions, I approached two very successful women in the cyber business. One, a startup entrepreneur, often listed in the top most influential women in tech list by various publications. The other, a cybersecurity executive in a large global bank. And both conversations, while separate, went in a very similar pattern. Me, would you be available to participate in the CyCon conference? Them, I would love to. Me, great, we're making a women-only panel and talk about women in cyber. Them, no, forget about it, I'm not doing this. After the first conversation, I was confused. When I noticed the pattern after the second conversation, I thought I saw the light. I had been thinking that in order to promote equality, we should promote women for being women. This kind of faulty thinking takes away the most important component of success, the achievements. No one likes to be robbed from something that they have worked so long and hard for, only to be recognized for their gender. We do not practice gender quotas here at CyCon. We never have, we could not. Our panelists are selected in a double-blind review process. We invite our keynote speakers based on merit and merit only, not based on gender, race, or any other characteristic that a person is born with and cannot affect. Let me be clear. The fact that women represent only about 20% of global cybersecurity workforce is unacceptable. But the only viable long-term solution is full and transparent fairness, not artificial quotas. I'm calling for more women to submit their papers to the next year's CyCon. And I promise that you will have neither an advantage nor a disadvantage in our double-blind selection process, as it has always been the case. I can assure you that those women on CyCon stage this week are here because of their achievements, and achievements only. And there is no better proof of this than our first keynote speaker. Madam President, CyCon is yours.
Thank you, Jaak, for the introduction, and thank you also for sharing your first lesson in feminism. Indeed, in 21st century, women don't do any more things because they are women. We work in a society equally. And I'm very grateful for people close to CyCon topics who taught you this lesson. It's valuable. Thank you all CyCon participants for being virtually here today with us. Let's be honest. I think that by now we are all tired of all these virtual events and video meetings. But the fact that there are more registered participants in this year's CyCon than ever before, this also shows just how important cyber conflict topics still are, maybe more important than ever before. And it also shows that you know where to come for solutions and discussions. CyCon, of course. Looking back at the past year, it's not surprising that CyCon's theme is going viral. The global pandemic changed a lot of things in our lives and activities. Hopefully, most of these changes are temporary. But when it comes to cyber, I'd say that the pandemic has really not changed anything fundamentally. This statement may sound a bit surprising to you, especially if we look back at some of the gloomy warnings and predictions that were made when the pandemic broke out in early 2020. But in retrospect, we can see that both the pandemic and other interesting incidents over the past year only confirmed what we knew beforehand about the trends, threats, and vulnerabilities. A couple of examples. The much talked about cyber attacks against hospitals in the Czech Republic, against vaccine laboratories in the UK, or against general practitioner centers in Finland were not totally new in themselves. It was generally known beforehand that healthcare organizations don't tend to have that good cybersecurity practices. So it was logical that malicious actors, both state and non-state, tend to capitalize whatever walks of life are currently on people's minds. Or take the SolarWinds attack discovered last December. That was probably one of the biggest cyber espionage cases so far in US history. We shouldn't play, of course, the blame the victim game, but I can't have been the only one who was surprised to find out that the company providing network software to the US federal government didn't have a chief information security officer, nor a director for cybersecurity on its payroll, or that they were still using passwords like SolarWinds123 to access their servers. Elementary omissions and the lack of basic cyber hygiene that should have been long dealt with. What the pandemic did do was that it widened the so-called surface of attack. People moved large chunks of their business, government activities, learning, and private life online. For cyber criminals and hackers, this just meant the number of potential targets increased immensely. And so, over the past year, we have witnessed a general surge in the number of attacks and incidents. The market for malicious activities has opened up, and anybody with elementary programming skills can do harm and sell these skills to criminals. As we know, the line between cybercrime and espionage, between state and non-state actors, is thin. But having said that, this trend of wider surfaces of attacks was probably anyway inevitable. The pandemic just accelerated this trend. The good news is that we know the cure and we have the vaccines for preemption. We've had them for a long time. And at least here in Estonia and in the NATO Cyber Defense COE, we have been talking about them for years. We all still need very basic, very effective things. Security by design, synergy between state and private actors, cyber hygiene for everybody, mainstreaming cyber defense, and the application of international law on cyber. The pandemic didn't really change anything here. It's understandable why politicians and private citizens alike are sometimes still slow to adhere to these practices. Often the news about cyber attacks don't touch upon a wide number of regular people. However, the warning signs about large-scale cyber disruptions have been there all along. I believe that this is also starting to change as we are seeing more high-profile events. Just 2 weeks ago, millions of Americans across the US East Coast were standing in queue for hours for a tank of gasoline due to the very heavy ransomware attacks against the fuel supplier Colonial Pipeline. The risks and consequences of cyber attacks probably do not get any clearer than that for any man on the bus or in the car. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to put some things into a bit wider perspective. To talk about not only the risks and threats that come with cyber and digital, but also about some of the possibilities that the past year has highlighted for me, and where trust and security plays a vital part. Last year, we saw how interdependent we actually are from each other, how intertwined and fragile global supply chains are. We are also witnessing a resurgence of a global competition between democratic and authoritarian powers. That will probably become one of the keywords of the 21st century. The outcome of this competition depends on who controls the infrastructure that the economies rely on. This includes the ways we move goods and people, how we produce and transport energy, how we create, transfer, and store digital data. By infrastructure, we don't mean merely roads or power lines, but also the information technology, capabilities of regions and organizations. Like data management, mobile telecommunications, and network infrastructure. This is something where like-minded, democratic countries with market economies could really take the next step forward in using the possibilities that their economies and close ties offer. So what we would need is a way, or a model, if you like, to promote quality investments. Investments that are inclusive, transparent, economically viable, financially, environmentally, and socially sustainable, and compliant with international standards and regulation. By agreeing on common standards and guaranteeing the free flow of data, we could create the necessary transparency. Most of all, we need a stamp of trust to make these projects and investments trustworthy. That would make large-scale cross-border infrastructure investments attractive for the private sector. I would call this initiative trust-based connectivity. It's strongly related to smart connectivity, as it was titled at the Free Seas Virtual Summit held in Estonia last October. But trust-based really coins the essence much better. And as you of all people know very well, trust is very much about security. We are currently discussing and brainstorming on how to implement this initiative. For all of you who are interested in this topic, I recommend you sign up for the Tallinn Digital Summit in September. Dear listeners, last but not least, I would like to touch upon the developments on how international law applies in cyberspace. This is the focal point of Estonian cyber diplomacy and also the NATO COE in Tallinn. 2 years ago, when we last met in person at CyCon, I officially introduced the Estonian official position on this topic. We compiled and we openly declared our position not only to give our cyber specialists, diplomats, and law experts firmer guidance for their everyday activities, but also statements like these are the things that actually create, define, develop international law, which by definition is a case law. We did it, and we encouraged other countries to follow suit. Some had also gone before us. 2 years ago, only a couple of states had done something similar, UK and France. But the number of official statements is increasing constantly. For example, Germany, Netherlands, Finland, all have joined this club in the meantime. Furthermore, there are now enough official statements on the application of international law in cyberspace that the NATO Cyber Defense COE is compiling a new, third version of the Tallinn manual to start codifying these positions. We ourselves have been elaborating our 5 basic positions. Our supplemented official position has now increased from a couple of pages to 9. I hope no more added bureaucracy is necessary. And it will be introduced in a couple of weeks at the UN Group of Governmental Experts. Also, as I promised when running for the non-permanent seat of the UN Security Council, we have started to mainstream this topic in the UN. Last spring, Estonia, together with US and UK, condemned the 2019 cyber attacks against Georgia, thus discussing the issue for the first time ever in the Security Council. Unconceivable, but indeed this was true. It had never been discussed in SC. This June, during our second presidency of the Security Council, we'll hold a high-level open debate on cybersecurity, which will be the first time that the UN Security Council members officially discuss this among themselves. Yes, we all know that consensus for change takes a lot of time on the international scene, especially in the UN. But even these relatively small steps are still steps forward. The other option would be to do nothing and watch as a bystander as malicious activities go viral, because some still doubt that international law should also apply in cyberspace. But we do not accept it. We continue to work for everybody to understand. Thank you for listening. And I wish you all a really interesting conference. See you hopefully next year, maybe more in person, but I also welcome that the highest ever number of participants has been achieved via this hybrid method. It is also something to celebrate, not only to commiserate. Thank you.